All right, well, thanks guys for braving the weather and coming checking this out. My presentation is sort of more on technical SEO, which is sort of more on the developer side of it, the things that we as developers can do to support the SEO efforts at our organization. There's a lot more to it than just this, often starting with things like keyword research and figuring out what people are searching for, and then creating content to kind of match those goals of those searchers. There's a whole separate side of it that's keyword research, and there's tools for that. I can kind of point you in the right direction, but that's not what this talk's about. It's more about the development side of it. So some things haven't changed, some things have been the same for forever, really since Google got started, and that's that. I don't know how to go full screen here. No. Think that go away? Okay, I'll do it. Great. Okay, so SEO is still like fundamentally is about creating great content that answers sort of questions or the searches that people are sort of searching for. And as a result, people will link to you if you have great content. So without amazing content, we won't have people kind of linking to us. And we won't be really answering the questions that people are trying to find. Without those people linking to us, we won't crack the first page of the Google search results for competitive keywords. And it's all relative. Like if you're trying to, rank or show up on the first page for sort of less competitive keywords, you still have to have more links than the other people that are, showing up on the first page. And so that's sort of not what this talks about. How to build links in terms of, that's more like outreach and sort of sometimes like, writing articles for people to get them to link to you. There's all kinds of strategies people use. Not, again, what this talks about, but creating great content and getting people to link to you is the foundation of all SEO. That's how you get to the first page of Google for things that people are searching for. But more recently, Google's added some additional kind of algorithms and sort of fancy stuff that they're calling rank brain and mobile first. But really, without great content, without getting to the first page of Google to begin with, this kind of more advanced stuff doesn't really have much of an impact. I mean, it might get you to the bottom of the second page to the top, but who really cares? So that's kind of just set up. Nothing's changed in groundswell different in SEO. You still need to kind of get the basics right, and content and getting links into your content is the basics.
Now, within your site, you need to have kind of internal links because often people will link to your homepage. People will link to sort of high traffic pages on your site, sites that are sort of landing pages on your site where it's good to drop new visitors. But there's a lot more to your page often than to your site than just the pages people are linking to. And so if you think of kind of what people call it link juice is all of kind of the benefit you get from people linking to you and linking to various pages on your site. You kind of want to spread that link juice around your site. And so internal linking is kind of like your real sitemap. You hear people talk about a sitemap XML a lot, and that's kind of a listing of every page on your site. To be honest, that's a bit like the old meta keywords tag. And if you don't have a lot of SEO experience, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. What that is you used to be able to tell Google with a little tag at the top of your page what your site was about, or what your page was about. You could say this page has information about SEO. That's a popular search topic is SEO. So this site's about SEO. It has linking information, all kinds of great stuff. But then your actual page had nothing to do with that. The content on your page was, I don't know, some crap that no one wanted to hear about. And so that was kind of like black hat SEO techniques. They would get traffic and hope that people who didn't mean to get there would kind of click on something or buy something. It never really worked that well, but the point is that Google doesn't pay any attention to that now. It just looks at your actual content and it figures out the keywords. It's the same with sitemap XML. You still want to do it. It's good to have a listing of every page on your site. Unless there are links to that page from outside of your site or within your site to that page, Google will probably ignore it. There's a good chance Google will ignore it. You can tell them about the page. Even on RateHub, we have, we tell Google about every page on our site. They actually index and crawl maybe 3/4 of that at most, because there's a lot of long tail stuff that we don't even link to internally. So point is, the internal linking structure between your pages on your site is very important. Links that are within the content matter more. There's evidence to suggest that things like links in your top nav or in the footer of your page get devalued relative to links in your content, but that's not to say that we shouldn't do have a top nav and a bottom nav. It's just, it might not get valued as much as links within the content.
Does Google have much luck with menus, or is it just menus just confusing?
No, very good. As long as you use kind of a basic unordered list structure, ULs and LIs with A tags inside, like links. No, that's what you want to do. Yeah, for sure. So any of like the high level structure, different sections of your site and some of the important pages within those sections, kind of want 2 or 3 levels of top nav typically that link to all the most important pages on your site. Yeah, and similarly with footer links and stuff, it probably gets devalued because often we hide them behind some kind of drawer, or you have to click to access them. But again, they're stuff that you want on every page. There's value in doing to linking to stuff there. And the other thing that people miss, and we've probably missed at RateHub to be honest, is judicious outbound linking is to be encouraged. In the past, you didn't want to outbound link. You wanted to keep all that link juice to yourself and not pass it to other sites. That's what people worried about anyway. That's kind of probably one of those things where it wasn't worth the trouble. And they're good at kind of catching up onto these tricks that people play and using it against them kind of thing. So really outbound linking helps Google determine the topic of your site. If you link to other good sources of information about the same topic as your site, that's a signal to them that this is, everything makes sense and there's not concerns here that you have good information and it's related to other good information in the same topic space. So yeah, this is some, where I got this information from, but sort of a guideline of how much to outbound link if you're writing, a significant content article. That's a good guideline. I was going to say, feel free to ask questions along the way. Some of these slides are very disjointed. There's not a lot of continuity, but we can also do questions at the end if you want. So rank brain, I touched on it earlier. This is sort of one of the new, if content and links are number 1 and 2 as in terms of most important factors in SEO, rank brain is kind of the third, I think. I sort of skipped ahead here, but rank brain has become the 3rd most important signal. And Google's sort of let us know that. But this is essentially a machine learning system that helps Google, sort their search results. And so, like I said, once things get onto the first page, it gets very hard for Google to kind of, automatically look at the content and know what people are going to like better. So they start using these interesting kind of algorithms where they kind of A/B test, and they'll check how users behave when they interact with your content. So how much do they click through when they see the link and the blurb underneath it in the SERP, the search engine results page? How much do they click through? And then how long do they spend there? I guess I flipped those. How long do they spend on your page, and how much they click through?
Those know how long someone spends on your page.
Well, like they know, they see you from when you're on their search results page, and then they send you off to ratehub.ca, let's say. If the user doesn't like that information, they're going to pop back to Google quite quickly. They see them again. They know you've bounced off RateHub, let's say, hopefully not, but they've bounced off RateHub, and now you're going to click on somebody else, and you click on somebody else, and you might stay there longer, in which case there's, at least for that user, the information that they found on that other site was more valuable because they stayed there longer, and so next time they might show up higher. The point is they do trials on thousands, hundreds of thousands of users and kind of see what's better.
They must assign
overall.
some weighting if you don't come back. They must assume it means 50% of the time or something, it means that you stayed there. Or you didn't come back.
Exactly, yeah. If you didn't come back to Google, then they think, yeah, you just stayed there, you dwelled a long time, you got lost in it, maybe you went somewhere else. That would be a good indication to them that you found something of value there, and maybe they should bump you up overall. It's not like one person, sees it and finds you. It's like, mass, thousands of users over a lot of different, and they'll move you around in the results in different users, just to kind of see how you perform in the third place versus the fourth place versus the second place and all that kind of stuff. So they're pretty, advanced, as we all know, in terms of what they're able to do. But these are some of the techniques they use.
I'd love to know what their algorithm for assessing. It's like science. Like they can do the negative case when you come back, but they can't do the positive case. So
yeah, you're right. Although at the same time, they do have. I don't know how this all works, but most people when they're using the web, a significant number of people are logged into Google, and so like even through the browser and stuff like that. So they can track us more than we are even aware, I think, at times. So
and Google Analytics as well.
That's right. That's on almost every page. So it's like, who knows what they're doing behind the scenes, tying all that information together. The other big thing that's happened in the last few years is this idea of mobile first, or mobile optimization and mobile first indexing. And more, we've got notified at RateHub, and if you have Google Webmaster Tools or Search Engine Console set up on your website, you'll get notified when your site gets switched to mobile first indexing. And I think eventually everyone's gonna get swapped over. So the idea is that the mobile version of your site is kind of your site according to Google. And it makes sense because on mobile we kind of pare down the stuff that's all around the interesting content and tend to hide it. And so it's just more signals to Google in terms of what is the most important content on your site is the stuff that's not hidden from mobile. So sidebars and stuff that we stick down at the bottom is going to get just sort of devalued relative to the content that gets shown at the top of a mobile page or is visible on a mobile page. So they have stated that sort of hiding things for mobile and putting things in tabs and maybe not showing things that are in the content is they're not going to take a negative stance on that anymore, but they still use that information in terms of ranking what's the most important thing on the page versus what's not. I think in the past, this is a message from Google, in the past they used to actually devalue, like maybe like kind of almost put a black mark on your page if you hid a lot of content, because they thought maybe you were trying to like keyword stuff in that hidden content and the visible content might be unrelated to it. Because on mobile we have to hide desktop content, it's they're not going to kind of, I think, de-rank the page, but they'll still use that as an indication in terms of what's the more important content, what's the less important content. Did that make sense?
Yeah. Is that strictly for mobile first indexing? Like, what about desktop indexing? Does that still apply?
It's a good question. They've said no with mobile first indexing. My point is that everybody's going to mobile first indexing. I mean, there's relatively few sites that don't have some kind of mobile site now. I'm not sure if you're not on mobile first indexing how it plays out, to be honest. It's weird. You get a lot of contradictory information. They'll say this, but then some study says, well, it's still devalued a little bit. So that's SEO for you. There's no no one knows exactly what's going on.
It must be though that the stuff that's mobile first is ranked higher on the desktop. Because how could you interpret it as being changing value when you're on the desktop like a lot?
It's not so much that like it's going to change. Yes, it's going to affect the desktop rankings. It's that Google looks at your mobile site first, and maybe exclusively in terms of taking cues for what's the most important content and what is the content on the site. So pay attention to what's showing up on on your mobile pages is the main takeaway. And if you're building a new site, sort of focus on your mobile site first. And also to say that we definitely shouldn't be doing like a separate URL for your mobile site and your desktop site now. It should be like a responsive design kind of done with CSS as much as possible. Having like m.ratehub.ca is kind of 5 years ago, and we wouldn't do that. Not to say if your site's like that, fine, but if you're going to do a redesign, consider one page with sort of responsive design. One of the other things that's come up sort of more in the last couple of years probably is featured snippets. It's sort of termed position 0. I don't know if you guys have seen this. I'll skip ahead because I've got a picture of it. This is sort of when you're searching for really anything that could happen. There's no, hard and fast rule about what search terms are going to pop up one of these, but anything that Google thinks it can answer with just a quick blurb or a at a glance view of something, it's going to try and do this these days. So this is a U.S. query, but mortgage rates, Wells Fargo, this isn't a regular search engine result. This is above the first position, we say. That's why it's called position 0. Google excerpts content from your page and displays it unstyled in a view like this, and not always complete. You can see they're telling you there's more information here. So click here if you want to see all that. But at a glance, I can kind of see this simple data table. The rates don't make as much sense to me because it's US and I don't know the market as well. But RateHub has had these kinds of positions in the past. I think they're doing A/B tests on us right now to compare to some other sites. So I haven't seen it as much lately, but we're figuring out what we can do to get back. And some of these techniques we're trying to apply.
Are you alerts of any kind? How are you finding out if that's happening? How are you knowing if you have featured snippet content?
Yeah, there's no way to know for sure. Like when we do our own, we do our own searches all the time to test stuff like this. More in 2018, we had a lot of our stuff showing up. It didn't show up particularly well because we weren't doing some of this stuff very well. That might be why they're trying some other sites. I think they always just are doing A/B tests in general. So the key thing with featured snippets is they just grab HTML, like Google grabs simple HTML structures from your page and displays them unstyled. So this is, or with very basic styling. So this is a data table they've pulled, like a HTML table content. I'll say Google tends to home in on simple HTML structures for these things. So lists tend to be about 10% of these, like simple unordered or ordered lists tends to be about 10% of these snippets. Tables about 7.5%, and the vast majority is just paragraph content in P tags. Seems to be 40 to 60 words is kind of the sweet spot. So if there's specific searches you're hoping to get the snippet for, they call it snippet bait. If you do Google searches for snippet bait, you'll kind of see some of these guidelines. And then headings in conjunction with any of the above. If you have a heading right above this, that's often what gets displayed kind of as the title. So this is probably a title tag and then a table tag. And like they'll take the top 3 rows, or they'll decide, who knows how it works, but they may kind of truncate some of the data. And this, like, we've seen a bias towards content toward the bottom of the page. I think Google might think that towards the bottom there's more likely to be like a summary or summary content that might be more like answering questions in a sentence or two. Seen some people say the opposite, so it's another one of those things that who really knows. I've seen enough examples in my experience both on RateHub and other sites to believe that if there's 3 tables on the page, they'll bias towards the one at the bottom. Because with all this stuff, there's no it's not structured enough for Google to know for sure that this is the answer to this question. But their algorithms are quite good, and you kind of have to try and guess what they're doing and play along a little bit. So yeah, it's another one of those tricky ones. But
Have you done A/B tests on that, or just an observational thing?
we're starting to do some tests. It's just the cycles that it works on it's not because we change our content, and then Google may take several months before they get around to, oh, these guys have changed their content, maybe we'll try that. And I also don't think it's human initiated, like it's, or maybe it is, it's no way. So you have to change your content and then leave it for some significant period of time and then see if there's any result. So the cycles are very long, I would say. So yes, we've changed some things. The cycles are very long.
Do you track how often Google checks your site? Like, do you look for robots?
Google Search Console is the best way. Like, they give you information about how often they're crawling your site and that kind of stuff. So yeah, Google Search Console is your best bet there. So
is that a big tool for your company to track how often they're?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say yes, definitely. So you set it up with your domain, and then you can give other people, like any number of people, access, and we monitor that pretty closely. Yep. That'll also tell you, give you warnings if something goes really wrong, and yeah, everybody should have it set up if they're concerned about SEO. So yeah, those featured snippets. This is just this one got put out of place a little bit. This was supposed to be earlier, but this is just general sort of SEO guidelines. You know, it's more on the content creator side, but sometimes as developers, we're in control of some of this stuff. If we don't have a full-fledged CMS or something, we might be creating the routes for these pages or something. So SEO-friendly URLs are really important. Something like this, you know, simple, keyword-rich URLs with dashes delimiting the words, or slashes, is, in my opinion, the best you can do. Google has indicated the first 3 to 5 words in a URL, so credit card's best, are given more weight, but generally you want keyword-rich URLs for your pages, even images. It's worth doing, I think. URL changes should not be taken lightly. If there's already significant link juice or, you know, SEO value built up on pages, should think twice about changing it. And if you do change it, be very careful. If you're changing URLs, you need to have a 301 redirect. So any people going or bots going to your old URL get automatically 301 redirected over to your new URL. It's usually a reasonable thing. Even on WordPress, you can create, like, or you can download plugins that allow you to just map old URL, new URL. So it's not a particularly difficult thing to do, but it gets overlooked sometimes. Image file names, same format, with keywords in the URL, can't hurt.
In your experience, do you penalize for changing URLs, or just because it takes a while to refigure out what's going on?
Yeah, I don't think it really gets penalized. There's some information to suggest that, like, if you redirect from an old page to a new page, 80 to 90% of the value gets propagated over to the new page. So it's not really something to worry about as long as you know, dot your I's and cross your T's or whatever it is. But you should have a good reason to do it. You should say, like, the old URL was bad for this reason. The new URL is going to be better for this reason, has better keywords. So I'm going to do that. Should be kind of like, you know, a decision to do it, as opposed to, oh, well, we just did it because it was, yeah, something like that. Semantic HTML, this is just the idea of using the most appropriate HTML tag for the job. It again, is sort of notes or hints to Google about, you know, how your content is structured and what the content is about and what type of content it is. These ones are probably the most important ones. These are things you use kind of at your, you know, page layout level. And often, if you're using like WordPress or something, the theme is going to handle a lot of this stuff. But if you're building your pages from scratch, you know, things like wrapping your nav in the nav tag, and your header and footer. The aside is kind of for a sidebar, and article and main kind of both are about, this is the main content of this page, section and summary too. Can be useful. So I put a reference in here. I'll share this with the group after, but you can click on that link. It's just sort of a link to just HTML documentation, and gives you more information about how these things are intended to be used and that kind of thing. In general, I say, like, anything's better than a div and a span. Not that there's anything wrong with div and span. If there's nothing more specific to use, that's fine. But always take a look and see if there's maybe something that would work a little better. Paragraphs, headings, ordered list, unordered list. Definition list is one that people generally don't know about, I would say. It's kind of like a key value pair. Here's the term and here's the definition. Here's the term and here's the definition. So that can add a little more structure to lists like that. Time, address, figure for pictures and stuff like that. Citing and quoting, that's valuable stuff too that we overlook sometimes. And then in your sort of just rich text content, things like strong indicate sort of semantics better than bold. Bold's just about how you present it. Strong is, I don't know. This is getting down to the nitty-gritty, but people would suggest you use these ones over. These are sort of the old style, and this is newer. Yeah, so some odds and ends one thing that we found, or SEOs have found, and these are some things that we'd like to apply at RateHub. We kind of have a crazy number of pages in some cases, some pages that Google doesn't even index because we don't have links to them. In a lot of cases, we'd be better off with fewer pages and with more sort of concentrated content on those pages. Generally, if you don't have links to the content or it's not unique content, like it's just like maybe the title is different. Like we have a lot of cases where this long tail cities and towns in Canada will have like Kingston mortgage rates and Toronto mortgage rates, and those might have some links to it, but I don't know, Parry Sound mortgage rates or getting way up there. I don't know. I'm trying to think of some town that I don't know, but you know, these really small towns, they're not going to have any search volume. They're not going to have any links. We'd be better off just not having those pages. So pruning pages actually often gives an SEO boost. You can see this quote, but
is there some way to tell Google that this is an automatically generated page in response to the user's location or something? That's not really meant to be like.
Yeah, well, it's like the only reason we have that page is because we thought that like, well, the top 10 or 20 cities in Canada, depending on like where you are, but there is some number of pages that you do want to have unique city content for. But unless you're willing to put the time in to actually, like, so we have rate tables, right? And sometimes the rates vary based on city and stuff like that. But that's not enough like having a rate 1% difference between, I don't know, Kingston and Belleville or something like that. It's not enough different content for Google to say like, oh, it's worth having these different pages.
But can you tell Google you don't want these pages ranked? That's not really part of your mission?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so, by not linking to them essentially. But then they're in your sitemap. There's evidence to suggest that pruning low-value pages periodically will give you a bit of boost. I guess that's the easiest way to put it. It's often the case that you get, whether you're automatically generating pages or not, you often get into these cases where there's a lot of these low-value, long-tail pages that don't have unique content. If those three things kind of hit, especially there's no unique content on it, get rid of it. Authorship configuration. So Google's released a new update. They're always releasing updates that kind of add functionality and certain signals and stuff like that. Authorship configuration. If you're producing a lot of blog posts or content, there's things you can do. I would follow this link to set up an authorship configuration that says all of these pages or these pages have been written by this author, and it helps just kind of Google to track like where the content's coming from, what's unique, and if you do a really good job of it, I think you kind of just get this natural benefit of being an expert or an authoritative person on that particular content. These are sort of odds and ends. I'm not as familiar with some of these things, so if you're really interested in here, follow the links here. And then comments. If you have a page with comments, people are actively commenting on your site, those are great signals, engagement, people are staying there longer. It all kind of goes together. And Google has said they'd rather you, and it's a little bit self-serving, I think, but they'd rather you have contents on your site than sort of sending people over to Facebook to do their interacting. It's probably a little self-serving for them, but hey, they can do that.
So that authorship configuration, is that a calculated authorship configuration? I mean, you're not totally familiar with that. But.
I'm not totally familiar. It's quite simple. I think it's a matter of adding some meta tags to your page or some tags to your page that kind of say, this who wrote this content, and you kind of get a profile of that content creator or author, contributor, whoever it is, or you can have a few of them, and it just helps Google track like where it's coming from, and if people like the content that certain creators are producing, I think it gives them a bit of a leg up maybe. But like I said, I'll share, so follow the link and kind of see what you get out of it. Get into a little bit more of sort of the dev heavier type stuff. We're getting towards the end, probably got a few more slides. So structured data, microformats, this is maybe something you would have seen before. Reviews is probably the place you see it most, but I'm going to skip ahead to an example of kind of how it manifests itself on Google. But This is sort of providing structured content on your site, whereas the position 0, I forget what featured snippets? Yeah, featured snippet stuff just uses kind of HTML content, which is lightly structured content. This is sort of like data, like structured data that you put in your site that Google can reliably read and understand and then manipulate and display in different ways. So you can see by kind of presenting, and there's a bunch of ways to present this kind of data. It doesn't have to be in this format. It's one of 3 or 4 formats, and some of them are just you can embed right in the HTML. But by putting these sort of structured data tags in here, Google can actually understand, show visualizations of reviews. For a track listing on an album, it can show the duration and the track list. Recipes, it can show reviews and how long it took to make and the calories, all this type of stuff that you could never do with just HTML content. You could never do reliably with just HTML content. So yeah, schema.org is probably the most well-known one, and that's the one I was showing you there. There's, if you follow the link here, they just basically kind of standardize the way of representing all kinds of different things, ratings, prices of products. For our business, these are some of the ones we're looking at. Bank account, deposit account, credit card, mortgage loan is not quite there yet, but it's close. And so they standardize all of the properties that you can represent of this entity or this type of thing. So they would have said, like, this is an example of type. So this is a specific type called recipe. So everything else here is going to be properties that are kind of tied to recipe and would have been defined in this schema. So they lay out all the things you can declare about a recipe, and then I can kind of manipulate my data so that it is output in this format, and then Google can read it and use it.
So does your data structure have to exist in a place like schema.org, or can you create your own?
Yeah, no, I mean, you can create your own, I guess, but Google won't understand it. Now, you'll be surprised if these are the ones I pulled out for Rate Hub, but there's hundreds, if not thousands at this point. So anybody who's selling a product or offering a service is likely to find something that they could use, if not just ratings. Ratings are always useful, but there are some more specific ones. So, and then some other types of metadata. Open Graph is stuff that is relatively easy to do. I think most people have through something like WordPress or a CMS like that is going to set most of this stuff automatically, but it changes how Facebook and other social platforms share your content. Like if someone posts a link on Slack or posts a link on Facebook, this is how Facebook kind of goes and pulls that rich snippet that they display. So yeah, here we go. So things like if you put an OG image tag in your content, then when a link is posted to that content, Facebook knows, okay, I'm going to display that image, not just some randomly selected image from the page. Same with title and description, and so you can see the pieces that get, you have control over, essentially, when someone shares your link, what is actually shown.
Do the non-technical people in your company have a tool that makes this easy for them to do?
Yeah, so like generally WordPress, there's some kind of CMS, but for WordPress, if you create a new post and you have the Yoast plugin, these are just text boxes you can fire into in most cases. Image would have to be referenced to an image, but title and description are just, and by default they'll match up with the WordPress title, but you can override it if you want. So some kind of, yes, as long as you have a CMS, you'll have something there. And then one thing I'll call Twitter cards. Yeah, so there's something similar for Twitter if you want to really affect how your Twitter content is being shared on Twitter. But these two are probably the more valuable ones. So yeah, getting a bit more into technical stuff, just want to highlight sort of the most important facets of site load time or page load time speed. The one I think kind of gets overlooked a little bit sometimes for some of this other stuff is server response time. The browser can't do anything until it has your the initial HTML for the request of the page. When you type in www.google.com or ratehub.ca, you're making a request for an HTML page. It comes back from the server. in that page is the links to all the JavaScript and CSS and other things that the browser will pull in. It can't start doing anything until this is done. So Google's guideline is 200-ish milliseconds. I kind of cherry-picked one of our pages that is close to that. There's some that aren't, and we're working on it. Lots of techniques you can use here, from optimizing your code to using caching and stuff like that, but there's not like it's not a simple fix always. Once your HTML page is down, that's when your browser starts kicking in and downloading a lot of other stuff. So just highlight. Does everybody know what this display I'm showing here? This is the Google Chrome developer tools. Hit F12. It's really easy. Even if you're not a developer, it's easy to kind of hit F12 and then get to the network panel, reload your page, and you can kind of get a sense for what's going on. So yeah, these are some page load times. Essentially, the DOM content loaded. This is kind of there's a few of them. I'm not going to get into the differences between them, but this is kind of like the first time the page could be somewhat interactable. I think you can scroll at this point. That 901 milliseconds is decent. Load is when all of the images and scripts and everything that are on the page have loaded. Most of the time we want less than this. Our site does have ads, and that it's tough to have ads and have your site load really fast. So we make sure the site's interactable and people can scroll, and the ads kind of load asynchronously. But I'll just say two more things. You want to minimize all of these things at the bottom, essentially. And the number of requests, these are the number of different assets you're loading. It might be images, it might be CSS. So the more you can combine all of your JS into one file, combine all your CSS into one file, you'll have less requests, and that's better. And similarly, you can have one request for a 3 or 4 meg file. That's still a lot of heft to pull down. This is completely uncached. This is the first time someone came to this page, so 3 megs, not ideal. We'd like to have it more in the 1 meg realm, I think. A lot of sites you pay a penalty the first time you go to a page. Everything is cached at that point, and subsequent loads are going to be a lot faster. But these are the things you want to minimize, essentially.
How much impact is it on coding, and how much impact is if you're using Amazon's ISN as opposed to a local ISP, how much is that going to impact on these?
This stuff, so the Amazon versus local hosting, that's going to come more into the site load time. You might get a bit faster performance, by using a really heavy-duty machine that crunches through your code faster and renders the page a little quicker. It's not going to help any of this stuff, really. CDNs, content distribution networks, can help a little bit with static images, assets like images, CSS, and JavaScript. These are just static files that, using a CDN, they kind of get pushed around the world, and so anybody accesses them, it's right there. For us, it's most of our users are in Canada, so we do use the CDN, but the impact is a little more limited. But yeah, this is more about how you've developed your site. There's developer tools and things that kind of combine CSS or minify it and make it smaller. You can't just pay more for a better machine to fix that. You got to get developers to do something. Techniques to improve. I'll rip through this pretty quickly. Guideline for server response time from Google is 200 milliseconds. They've done crazy amounts of studies that say that after that point, especially on desktop, people are going to start being I don't know if I'm going to click back and go somewhere else. That's a pretty aggressive goal, though, target too, I would say. So we're trying to get there. We're not quite there yet on all our pages. Bundle and minify CSS and JS. I mentioned this, combining files and then using tools to minify them, which means just kind of converting them into removing spaces and doing some complex transformations in some cases to minify it. These are more advanced techniques. They're not going to come with a typical CMS, but this is some of the stuff we're working on, is just loading some of the stuff you need to render the page and then keeping the rest of the stuff kind of in separate files that when I transition to a different page, only then do I kind of load the stuff that I need for that page. Similarly for CSS, just kind of having the CSS you need for that initial render of the page the user sees, and loading everything else kind of behind the scenes. Compressing, this is something that's really quite easy to do using CDNs or even tools locally is just kind of compressing files. We can talk more about that if anybody wants to know about that. Optimizing images, so often images you might be displaying an image like this size on your page, but the image uploaded was like 3 or 4 megs, and the browser resizes it, but the user had to download those 3 megs. And server-side rendering with SPAs, this is kind of an advanced technique, but more and more renderings happening in the browser, but using server-side rendering can speed things up a bit. This is probably not something you'd worry about if you have a CMS site. This is more of an advanced technique type of thing.
So you said you use yours on the WordPress.
WordPress, yeah.
Is there are there equivalent plugins for some of these types of things that are popular?
Bundling and minifying CSS, probably. Most CMSs would do that. Some of these advanced techniques, less so. Like you need to do like kind of custom coding or have a custom framework that's not like a CMS. But you can get a lot, like the vast majority of sites doing kind of this well in a CMS will get you most of the way there. Like it's probably not your biggest concern. Is this my last one? Yeah. We don't have to get too much into this, but if you are using like a client-side rendering framework, like the newest versions of Angular and React or Ember, these types of things, the server doesn't really pass down a bunch of HTML anymore. It just kind of passes down this skeleton with some JavaScript references. The JavaScript loads and then makes requests to the server for data, and then everything gets kind of rendered, like the HTML gets built in the browser. That's really great. There's lots of benefits to doing that. There's a lot of flexibility, but when SEO is a concern, you can't beat server rendered content. RateHub, we're heavily SEO driven. Our acquisition, at least at this point, we want to diversify, but certainly at this point, the vast majority of our users come through Google. Google's doing some stuff, forget where I said here. Google's doing a second pass, so the typical Google bot will just request your HTML. If it sees that's an SPA, that's going to be pretty empty, and they'll queue up this second pass, which is a more complex robot that actually loads the HTML and all of the script and tries to scrape that. It can happen up to a day or two later than the initial pass, so with regularly updated content, it's not great. There's also indication that that content gets devalued a bit. There's just a whole bunch of reasons why we're not willing to bet our business on it, essentially. And so, and yes, like I said, other search engines are likely behind where Google is. So if you are going to use an SPA and SEO matters to you, you want to make sure you understand how to do server-side rendering. That's which is more like a typical website. Anything like WordPress or typical stuff is going to do server-rendered content. It's just this new world of SPAs that's kind of come up in the last 4 or 5 years in JavaScript land. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Hope you guys got something out of this. And yeah, any questions, please hit me.
That was awesome. Thank you.